I never thought the walls of my own home would become the stage for betrayal. That villa, it wasn't just a house. It was the dream my husband and I built brick by brick, dollar by dollar, sacrifice by sacrifice. We didn't come from money. Every inch of that land, every tile on the floor, every window that let the sun in. It was earned with sweat and patience, with nights of hunger and days of hard work. I remember the first time we walked through it after it was finished. My husband held my hand and he whispered, "This will be our safe place forever. No matter what happens, this will always be yours." He's gone now. Cancer took him before his time. But that villa is the only piece of him I have left. It was supposed to be my safe haven. My gift to my daughter. A legacy. The place where birthdays would be celebrated, where my grandchildren would grow up, where family would gather around the table. But instead, my daughter looked me in the eye and told me, "This isn't yours anymore. This belongs to his family now. You are not allowed to come here." I smiled. I nodded, and in that moment, she thought she had won. But what she didn't know is that I was already preparing a surprise that her husband's family would never forget. The villa, it wasn't just walls and a roof. To the world, it might have looked like just another house sitting on a quiet street. But to me, it was the beating heart of my entire life. Every stone in the foundation carried my husband's sweat, and every piece of wood carried my prayers. When I close my eyes, I can still see the beginning. My husband and I were so young back then, barely making enough to get by. He worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3, and I stitched clothes late into the night just to keep food on the table. We lived in a small rented apartment where the walls were thin, where we could hear the neighbors argue, where the pipes leaked, and where the winters felt endless. But even in those hard years, we dreamed. He would take my hand and whisper, "One day we'll have a home that is ours. A home no one can take from us." It took years of saving, years of saying no to ourselves so that someday we could say yes to something bigger. When other couples went on vacations, we stayed home. When others bought new cars, we kept patching up the old one. I watched him come home with blisters on his hands, shoulders aching, yet still smiling when he saw me. And I gave everything I had to keep the family together. When our daughter was born, the dream became sharper, more urgent. I wanted her to grow up in a place where she could run barefoot on the grass, where birthdays could be celebrated with balloons tied to the porch, where she could paint her walls any color she wanted because it would be our walls, not a landlord's. The day we signed the papers for that villa, I thought my heart would burst. I remember my husband holding me in the driveway, his arms strong around me and saying, "We did it. This is where we'll raise her. This is where she'll always feel safe." And we did. That villa became the backdrop of my daughter's entire childhood. I can still picture her first steps, tiny feet wobbling across the living room floor, her little hands reaching out toward me. She fell down, giggled, and then got back up again. I can still hear the sound of her laughter bouncing off the walls, echoing through the hallways. That laughter filled every corner of the house with light. There were nights when storms rattled the windows and she would crawl into bed with us, snuggling between me and her father. I would stroke her hair and whisper, "Don't be afraid, sweetheart. These walls will always keep you safe." And she believed me. Back then, she believed me. The villa wasn't just a shelter. It was a living memory book. Every scratch on the floor, every dent on the walls told a story. The time she spilled paint trying to make me a picture for Mother's Day. The time my husband accidentally dropped a hammer and cursed under his breath, only to see her standing there wide-eyed, repeating the word with a mischievous grin. The holidays we spent around the fireplace, wrapping presents, cooking meals together, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. Christmas mornings were magical in that house. I would wake up early, tiptoeing into the kitchen to prepare cocoa and warm rolls, while my husband would sneak presents under the tree. The sparkle in our daughter's eyes when she came running down the stairs, Her little hands shaking the boxes is something I'll never forget. Her joy was the reward for every sleepless night, every sacrifice. Birthdays were always grand in that villa, no matter how little money we had. I would save for weeks, sometimes months, just to buy her a cake and a few gifts. We'd decorate the house with balloons and streamers. I can still see her face when she blew out the candles, surrounded by friends, her laughter spilling into the warm air. To her, it was magic. To me, it was worth everything. And then there were the simple moments. The dinners we shared at the table, the homework spread out across the kitchen counter, the evenings spent on the porch watching the sunset. My husband loved to hum while fixing things around the house. He'd whistle as he painted the fence, hammer in hand, sweat dripping, but always with a smile. Our daughter would sit nearby, drawing pictures of the villa, proudly announcing, "This is our forever home." I carried that phrase in my heart. Forever home. That was what it was meant to be. But forever doesn't always last. When my husband passed away, the villa became even more sacred to me. His chair was still at the dining table. His tools were still in the shed. His scent lingered in the hallways. I would walk through the rooms and feel him everywhere. In the laughter, in the walls, in the very air I breathed. I held on tightly because letting go of that villa felt like letting go of him, and I wasn't the only one who grew up inside those walls. My daughter's life unfolded there. Her first day of school. I remember braiding her hair at the kitchen table, her backpack bigger than her tiny body. Her teenage years, slamming doors, loud music, arguments that ended with tears and apologies. Her prom night, standing on the staircase, glowing in her dress, her father with tears in his eyes as he told her how beautiful she looked. The villa carried us through every storm. When money was tight, we leaned on each other inside those walls. When tragedy struck, the villa gave us comfort. It was never just a structure. It was family. Every time I walk through those hallways, memories flood me. The photo frames on the walls tell our story. Birthdays, graduations, holidays, even the small, ordinary days that became extraordinary simply because we shared them together. That villa holds more than just furniture and things. It holds the very essence of who we were. I sacrificed everything to keep it. There were times I thought about selling it when bills piled up, but I couldn't. It was my promise to my husband. It was my gift to my daughter. It was supposed to be her inheritance, her safe place, her reminder of where she came from. That villa was not built with money alone. It was built with my blood, my tears, my laughter, and my love. Every nail, every beam, every flower planted in the garden carried a piece of me. It was the only place on earth where I felt whole. And that is why what happened next cut me so deeply. Because when she took it away, when she gave it to them, she wasn't just giving away walls and windows. She was giving away my life, my husband's legacy, the very heart of our family. But for now, all you need to understand is this. The villa was everything. It was my beginning, my middle, and what I thought would be my end. It was built with love. And that love was betrayed. I always thought the bond between a mother and her daughter was unbreakable. I believed that no matter what life threw at us, she and I would stand side by side. I gave her every ounce of love I had, every sacrifice, every lesson, every meal cooked when I was exhausted, every late night spent waiting until she came home safe. She was my only child, the very reason I breathed after my husband passed away. But love does not always protect you from betrayal. Sometimes it blinds you to the signs until it's too late. It began slowly, so quietly that I almost didn't notice. After she married, something inside her shifted. At first, I thought it was normal. After all, every young woman changes when she starts a new life, takes on new responsibilities, becomes part of another family. I told myself it was just adjustment. I convinced myself that she still needed me, that I was still her mother, her home. But soon, the little changes grew into something darker. She stopped calling me every evening, the way she used to. When I asked how she was doing, her answers were clipped, impatient, as if I were bothering her. She no longer came by the villa with the same excitement in her eyes. Instead, when she did visit, it was as if she were checking off an obligation. I would set the table, cook her favorite meals, the same dishes she had begged for as a child, and she would pick at her plate, scrolling through her phone, barely listening to me speak. And then came the silences, the long stretches of days where I wouldn't hear from her at all. I would sit in the living room, the same room where I had once rocked her to sleep, the same room where we had celebrated birthdays and Christmas mornings, and I would wait for the phone to ring. But it stayed silent. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I was too protective. Maybe I didn't give her enough space. Maybe she just needed time to settle into married life. But deep inside, there was a quiet ache, whispering that something was terribly wrong. The truth revealed itself when I spent time around her new family, her husband's parents, her in-laws. From the very beginning, they looked at me with eyes full of judgment, eyes that scanned my clothes, my furniture, my mannerisms, as though I were beneath them. They never once said it outright, but I could feel it. The disdain, the greed. They saw the villa, not the woman who built it. To them, I was just an old widow clinging to a house too fine for her. They whispered in corners when they thought I couldn't hear, and sometimes they didn't bother to whisper at all. One afternoon, during a family gathering, her mother-in-law walked through my kitchen as if it already belonged to her. She opened drawers, inspected dishes, and said with a sly smile, "Such a beautiful home. It must feel too large for just one person." I smiled politely, but inside I felt the sharpness of her words. I knew what she was implying. She saw me as an obstacle, something in the way of her family's comfort. My villa was no longer my safe place in her eyes. It was simply a prize to be claimed. And my daughter, my own flesh and blood, stood by her side, silent. Day by day, her distance grew. She stopped defending me, stopped reaching for me the way she once did. She began to echo her husband's words, her in-laws' opinions. She began to look at me not as her mother, but as someone in the way. It reached its breaking point on an afternoon that still haunts me. I remember the way the light poured into the living room, golden and warm, almost cruel in its beauty, because what was said that day froze my heart forever. My daughter stood before me, her face cold, her eyes hard. She didn't sit down. She didn't hold my hand the way she once did as a little girl. No, she looked at me as if I were a stranger. And then, in a voice I can still hear, she said, "This villa is theirs now. You are not allowed to come here anymore." I couldn't breathe. For a moment, I thought I had misheard her. My ears rang, my chest tightened, and I waited for her to laugh, to tell me it was some cruel joke, something said in anger that she would take back. But she didn't. She stared at me, her words hanging heavy in the air, cutting deeper than any knife ever could. I tried to speak. My lips trembled, but no words came out. I wanted to ask her how she could say that. I wanted to remind her of the nights I stayed awake with her when she was sick, of the times I scraped together pennies so she could have what she wanted, of the moments we had shared in that very home. I wanted to scream, "How dare you!" But I couldn't. Instead, I just looked at her. My daughter, the little girl who once painted me pictures and said, "I love you, Mommy." The little girl who once promised she would never leave me. And yet here she was, standing tall and cold, giving away the only thing I had left of her father, the only thing that tethered me to the life we had built together. The villa wasn't just a house. It was the embodiment of my love, my sacrifices, my husband's legacy. And she had handed it away as if it were nothing more than a trinket. She didn't just give away walls and furniture. She gave away me. My heart shattered in that moment, not because of the villa itself, but because of what it meant. My own child, my blood, had chosen others over me. She had chosen greed, convenience, and coldness over love. I sat down slowly, my legs too weak to hold me. She didn't come closer. She didn't reach for me. She simply turned her head, as if ashamed, or perhaps as if she had already moved on. And in that moment, I understood what betrayal feels like. It is not a sharp stab, but a slow, crushing weight pressing down on your chest until you cannot breathe. It is the sound of silence where love used to be. It is looking into the eyes of your child and realizing you no longer recognize the person staring back at you. I wanted to cry, but the tears would not come. I wanted to scream, but my voice was gone. So I sat there, in the villa I had built with love, listening to my daughter's words echo in my mind. This villa is theirs now. You are not allowed here anymore. And as the echo faded, a silence filled the room, a silence that told me everything had changed forever. When my daughter told me those words, "This villa is theirs now. You are not allowed here anymore," I felt the ground fall away beneath me. But what shocked her most was not what I said. It was what I didn't say. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I simply smiled. It wasn't the kind of smile born of joy. No, it was the smile of a woman who has lived too long, fought too many battles, and learned the power of silence. A smile that hides storms. A smile that protects dignity when others try to strip it away. I nodded gently, as though her words meant nothing, though inside they pierced me deeper than any knife. I folded my hands, steady and calm, while my daughter, my own child, tried to strip away everything that defined me. I could see the flicker in her eyes, the hesitation. She expected tears. She expected anger. She expected me to collapse, to plead with her, to beg her not to do this. But instead she saw a mother who looked back at her with a smile that revealed nothing. Because that's what I chose in that moment. To reveal nothing. What she could not see, what her in-laws could not guess, was the storm that had already begun to form inside me. Quiet, measured, patient. You see, when life has beaten you down as many times as it has beaten me, you learn that anger wastes energy. Rage burns too quickly, leaving nothing behind but ashes. But silence. Silence is powerful. Silence is a weapon. And silence gives you time to think, to plan, to choose your moment carefully. I nodded at her words, as though they were law, as though her decision carried weight. But inside, I whispered to myself, "This villa was built with my hands. This villa carries my husband's blood, and no one, not even my own daughter, will take it from me." In that moment, I let go of the need to explain myself. I let go of the desire to remind her of all I had done, of the nights I went without food so she could eat, of the clothes I patched and repatched so she could walk into school with her head held high. I let go of the hope that she might change her mind, that she might see me again as the mother who once meant everything to her. Instead, I chose silence. But silence did not mean weakness. No, my silence was the quiet sharpening of a blade. I spent the following days moving through the villa as though nothing had changed. I walked the halls, I watered the plants, I folded laundry, all the while keeping my face calm, steady, unreadable. To anyone watching, I looked like a woman accepting her fate. To anyone listening, I sounded like a woman who had surrendered. But inside, I was carefully, deliberately, planning. At night, I would sit at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once served family dinners, the same table where my husband had once laughed with our daughter. And I would think. I would map out scenarios in my head. What could be done? What steps I needed to take? Who I could trust? I realized quickly that revenge was not about shouting, nor about confrontation. No, the sweetest revenge is not loud. It is patient. It is precise. It is delivered with dignity so that those who betrayed you never see it coming. And so, I smiled. I smiled when my daughter called me with her cold voice, asking if I had begun preparing to leave the villa. I smiled when her husband's family stopped by, walking through my living room as though they were measuring it for themselves. I smiled even when her mother-in-law made a cruel remark about how a house this size deserves a family who can truly use it. I smiled, nodded, and stayed silent, because I knew something they did not. Their arrogance was blinding them. They thought my silence meant surrender. They thought my smile was weakness. They thought I was an old woman with no fight left in her. But what they didn't realize was this. Silence gave me the greatest gift of all. Time. Time to think. Time to plan. Time to prepare. Inside my chest, the pain of betrayal burned like a fire. My own daughter, the child I raised, the girl who once held my hand and begged me never to let go, had traded me for the approval of strangers. She had taken the house her father and I had built with blood and sacrifice, and she had handed it over like a prize. That betrayal cut deeper than words can describe. But that same betrayal gave me strength. It hardened my resolve. When you've lived a long life, you understand something younger people don't. Revenge doesn't have to come quickly. In fact, it should not. True revenge is a seed. You plant it quietly, deep in the soil of patience, and you wait. You water it with silence, you nurture it with calm, and you let time do the rest. And so, I became a gardener of revenge. Each day as I went about my routines, I thought about the steps I needed to take. Each night as I closed my eyes, I reminded myself of my husband's words. This will always be yours. No matter what happens, this will always be yours. Those words became my armor. They became my guiding light. I was not just fighting for myself. I was fighting for him. For the love we had poured into this villa, for the legacy that was never meant to be stolen. So when my daughter looked at me with disdain, expecting to see defeat, she saw only my smile. She mistook it for acceptance. She thought I had given up. She thought she had won. But the truth is, she had already lost. Because in that silence, in that nod, in that quiet smile, I had already begun to weave the plan that would bring everything crashing down around them. They would never see it coming. And when the moment arrived, when they believed they had taken everything from me, they would discover that the woman they thought was weak, the woman they thought was broken, the woman who smiled in silence, was the same woman who had outsmarted them all. That was my silent promise to myself. And so I smiled. After that day, the day my daughter told me I was no longer welcome in my own home, the villa became quiet in a way I had never known before. But it was not the silence of defeat. No, it was the silence of preparation. I moved through the house with calm, steady steps. On the outside, I looked like a woman accepting her fate, ready to hand over her life's work. But inside, I was sharper than ever. Every corner of that villa whispered to me, "Do not let go. Do not surrender. Fight with patience." And so I began to prepare. The first step was simple. I gathered every document, every paper, every proof of ownership that tied me to that villa. Deeds, tax records, bills of sale, photographs of my husband and me breaking ground in the early years. I opened old drawers, pulled out dusty boxes, flipped through folders that had sat untouched for decades. Each paper I touched felt like a weapon, a shield. Proof that this villa was not theirs. Proof that it was mine. Proof that no matter how much they schemed, they could never erase my name from its foundation. I kept those papers close, locked away where no prying eyes could find them. Because while my daughter thought my silence meant surrender, I knew better. Silence was my shield, but proof would be my sword. The second step was more difficult. I needed to ensure the villa would never fall into greedy hands. Not hers, not her in-laws, not anyone's who wished to strip it of its meaning. And so I began to make quiet arrangements. I met with a lawyer, an old friend of my husband's. We sat in a dimly lit office, the smell of old books and ink filling the air, as I laid out my fears. He listened carefully, nodding as I explained how my daughter had turned against me, how her husband's family was circling like vultures. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said words that steadied my heart. "They may think they can take your home, but the law is not so easily fooled. If you are careful, if you prepare, this villa will remain yours until your last breath, and beyond." Together we drew up papers. Quiet papers, binding papers, arrangements that would keep the villa safe, even if I no longer walked its halls. I signed with a steady hand, my pen scratching against the page like the sound of a door locking shut. But I did not stop there. I began making financial moves, small and deliberate. I shifted accounts, secured savings, set aside funds that no one but I could touch. I sold things quietly. Jewelry I no longer wore, heirlooms that carried little weight compared to the villa. With each decision, I built a wall they could not climb, a fortress of security they would never see coming. And all the while, I never let them suspect a thing. When my daughter called, her voice sharp and impatient, asking if I was ready to leave, I smiled through the phone. I told her, "Yes, dear, I am preparing." She thought she had won. She thought her words had broken me. She could not see that each time I said yes, I was weaving another thread into my plan. Her husband's family grew bolder. They walked the villa with their eyes like scavengers, pointing at walls they would paint, rooms they would rearrange, furniture they would discard. They spoke as though it already belonged to them. And I smiled. I nodded. I stayed quiet. But inside, every cruel word they spoke became fuel. Every greedy glance became fire. I was not rushing. That was the beauty of it. I did not need to. Revenge does not come to those who hurry. It comes to those who wait. And I had learned over a lifetime of sacrifice the art of waiting. I began to move things quietly within the villa. Not out of desperation, but out of care. I packed away treasures. Photographs of my husband, my daughter's childhood toys, letters we had written to each other. I placed them where no one else could find them, hidden behind false drawers, tucked inside old trunks, stored with people I trusted. If they thought they would inherit not just the villa but the memories inside it, they were mistaken. The house may have walls, but the soul of it, the memories, the love, the life, belonged to me, and me alone. There were nights I sat on the porch, watching the sun sink into the horizon, my hands folded in my lap, my mind calm but determined. I thought of my husband, his voice echoing in my ears. "This will always be yours." And I whispered back into the dusk, "Don't worry, my love. They will never take it." Day after day, my plan grew stronger. Piece by piece, I constructed something they would never see until it was too late. I wanted them confident. I wanted them bold. I wanted them to believe they had already won. Because the higher they climbed, the harder the fall would be when the ground crumbled beneath their feet. There is a strange kind of strength in betrayal. It wounds you, yes. It breaks you open. But once the bleeding stops, once the tears dry, you find something in yourself you never knew existed. A power, a clarity, a steel in your spine. My daughter's betrayal nearly destroyed me, but instead it forged me into something harder, stronger, unshakable. So I kept smiling. I smiled when they brought their relatives to see their future home. I smiled when they spoke of renovations and parties they would host. I smiled when my daughter avoided my eyes, pretending she was innocent. I smiled because I knew what they did not, that everything they planned, every fantasy they built in their minds would soon come crashing down. My preparations were nearly complete. The villa was secured. My husband's legacy was locked tight. And the stage was set. But I would not reveal it yet. No, the surprise needed time to ripen, like fruit on a branch. If plucked too early, it would not sting the way it needed to. If revealed too soon, it would not break them in the way they deserved. And so, I waited. calm, steady, patient. I lived each day as though nothing had changed, walking the halls, watering the plants, cooking my meals, while inside me the storm gathered. The papers were signed, the funds were secured, the memories were safe. All that remained was for them to take the final step, to arrive with their suitcases, their smiles, their arrogance, and try to claim what they thought was already theirs. Only then would I let the surprise unfold. I promise you this. It would not be loud. It would not be violent. It would not even require me to raise my voice. No. My surprise would be quiet, sharp, and unforgettable. A single act that would turn their triumph into humiliation. And when that day came, when they walked into the villa believing it belonged to them, they would learn the truth. This house was not theirs. It was never theirs. It was mine. And mine it would remain. The morning they came, the air felt heavier than usual. I had risen early, before the sun had painted the sky. The villa was quiet, but not the same kind of silence as before. This silence hummed with anticipation. The kind of stillness that comes before a storm, when the trees hold their breath and even the birds wait. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, the steam rising like a ghost. I stared at the walls, the photos, the furniture that had stood with me through decades of life. I whispered to myself, today is the day. And then I heard it, the rumble of engines, tires on gravel, doors slamming, voices loud and full of excitement. They had arrived. My daughter, her husband, his parents, even some cousins I had never met, all tumbling out of their cars like they were entering a parade. They were laughing, smiling, pointing up at the villa as if it were some prize they had earned. I stood by the window, hidden by the curtain, and I watched them. They carried boxes, suitcases, even furniture strapped to trucks. They were ready to move in. Ready to erase me, ready to step into my life as though I had never existed. But I was waiting. When the first knock came at the door, it wasn't timid. It was firm, entitled, almost demanding. I let them knock twice, 3 times before I opened it. And there they stood. My daughter avoided my eyes, her husband smirking beside her, his family standing behind them like an army. They expected me to be frail, broken, defeated. They expected me to step aside with trembling hands, whispering, "It's yours now." Instead, I smiled. "Come in," I said softly, stepping aside. They entered like conquerors. Their eyes roamed over the walls, the floors, the furniture. They spoke loudly, claiming rooms before even setting their bags down. "This will be ours. We'll repaint this. We'll tear that down." My daughter walked through the villa as though she had never lived here, as though the memories of her childhood had already been scrubbed away. I followed behind, quiet, calm, watching them take ownership of something that had never belonged to them. And then, at the right moment, I cleared my throat. "Before you unpack," I said, my voice steady, "there's something you should know." They turned to me, impatient, annoyed. The husband crossed his arms. His mother rolled her eyes. My daughter looked at me with that cold expression I had grown used to. "What now?" she snapped. I didn't answer with anger. I didn't raise my voice. Instead, I walked to the dining table where a neat stack of documents lay waiting. I picked them up slowly, deliberately, and laid them down in front of them. "These are the ownership papers," I said. "The deeds, the legal arrangements. Every line signed, every seal stamped. This villa is mine. It has always been mine, and it will remain mine until the day I die and even after. You may have told me I was not allowed here. You may have thought you could take it. But you were wrong." The room went still. At first, they laughed. They thought it was a bluff. But as their eyes scanned the papers, as they saw the signatures, the notarizations, the legal weight behind every word, the laughter drained from their faces. Confusion spread first, then shock, then humiliation. The husband's father sputtered, his face red, his hand trembling as he pointed at me. This isn't fair. She told us. She said, yes, I said calmly, cutting him off. She told you lies. She told you what you wanted to hear, but the truth is written in ink. The truth is in every stamp, every seal, every line of law. This villa is not yours. It never was. My daughter's face paled. She looked at me then. Really looked at me. For the first time in months. Her lips parted, but no words came out. She had believed my silence meant weakness. She had thought my smile was surrender. And now she saw what it truly was. Patience. Strength. Justice waiting for its moment. Her husband's family began to argue, their voices loud, clashing against one another. They accused me, accused her, accused the system. But I didn't waver. I stood there, dignified, calm, letting their fury bounce against the walls like waves against rock. Finally, when their shouting slowed, I spoke again. You came here with your belongings, I said, my voice low but steady. You came here to move into a home that was never yours. But now you will leave with nothing but shame. Because this house, this villa, belongs to me. And it will remain so long after you are gone. The silence that followed was heavier than the air that morning. I watched as humiliation settled over them like a shroud. Their shoulders sagged. Their faces burned red. One by one, they turned their eyes away from me. Even my daughter could not meet my gaze. I could have screamed. I could have thrown them out with fury, with venom. But I didn't. That was not my way. I wanted my revenge to be quiet, sharp, unforgettable. And that is exactly what it was. I looked at them one last time and said, now, you may leave. And they did. One by one, they picked up their boxes, their bags, their pride scattered like ashes at their feet. They walked out of the villa in silence, the same villa they had claimed only moments before. Outside, I watched them load their things back into their cars, their faces downcast, their voices hushed. My daughter lingered for a moment at the door. Her eyes were wet, her lips trembling. For a second, I saw the child she once was, the girl who had laughed in these halls, who had blown out birthday candles at this very table. But that girl was gone, replaced by a woman who had chosen greed over love. She whispered, barely audible, Mom, how could you? And I answered softly, how could I? No, my dear, the question is, how could you? Her face crumbled. And then she too turned and walked away. The sound of engines faded down the road, leaving me once more in silence. But this time it was not the silence of betrayal or the silence of waiting. It was the silence of peace. I stood in the doorway, the villa behind me, the horizon before me. I breathed deeply, the air cool against my skin, and I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. They had come to claim my home, but instead they had walked straight into the truth. They had expected to see me broken, powerless, erased. Instead, they left broken themselves. And I was still here, strong, unshaken, dignified. This villa, my husband's legacy, my life's work, my family's heart, remained where it always belonged, with me. And though my daughter may never understand it, one day, perhaps, she will remember. One day she will see that what I did was not cruelty, but justice. That my silence was not weakness, but strength. That my revenge was not fueled by hate, but by love. Love for the man who built this with me. Love for the memories we made. Love for the legacy I refused to see destroyed. As the sun set that evening, its golden light spilling across the villa walls, I whispered once more into the quiet. It's still ours, my love. They will never take it. And with that, I closed the door. Betrayal is a strange thing. It never comes from enemies. It always comes from those you once held closest, Those you fed, those you nurtured, those you believed would protect you when the world turned cold. My betrayal came from my own daughter. And though the wound will never fully heal, I have learned that betrayal does not define me. It defines her. Family is meant to be built on love, respect, and sacrifice. I gave all of that and more. But when greed enters the heart, when respect dies, family can become stranger than strangers. My daughter chose greed. She chose to dishonor her mother, to hand my home, our legacy, to those who did not build it, who did not sacrifice for it. And for that choice, there was a price. Justice does not always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it looks like silence, like patience, like a quiet smile while others think they've won. But when the time comes, justice always arrives. So let this be a warning. Greed devours itself. Disrespect shatters its own foundation. And betrayal always circles back to the one who casts it. As for me, I remain standing, strong and unbroken, in the home I built with love. And I will say this one final time with all the dignity I have left. This villa was mine, it is mine, and it will always be mine.